What's going on, girls and guys? What's going on, wrestling fans? Once again, it is your host, your friend, Arachnid Soul, coming to you today with the very first ever Arachnid Soul Pro Wrestling podcast. Now, I'm joined by a guy I haven't made a video with or done anything with for 8 months, since July of last year, 2014, RedEyeJedi. RedEye, what's going on?
Hey, how you guys doing? I'm doing great. How are you doing, Racket?
Yeah, everything's going great. I mean, you know, you're a big wrestling fan. I'm a big wrestling fan. And I thought this is a great idea. This is actually an idea that Mike Tenay and Taz had, and they came up with their top 10 pro wrestling managers of all time. And when I heard they were doing that, and when I thought about how I wanted to listen to them, I said, I'm going to come up with my list before I hear their list. So the list that you're about to hear, I came up with completely on my own. I was not influenced by them. I didn't switch anything around when I heard theirs. And I don't even think RedEye heard their list. So yes, this is going to be top 10 pro wrestling managers of all time. And I have to tell you, you know, you're not seeing a lot of graphics or things in the background. We're just, you know, it's a podcast. So just relax. And I understand that RedEye, you don't have number 9 and 10. So
I can only come up with 8, man. Like, off the top of my head, I was thinking of managers and who were real managers that actually influenced the wrestling game, you know. And
right.
The other 9 and 10 I had weren't.
Okay. Well.
Weren't.
Okay.
I thought were really worthy.
So I'll give you my 10 and my 9, and then you can give me 8, and I'll give you 8, and we'll continue from there. Now, I did not have any flags on this. I thought anyone who's been a pro wrestling manager is fair game. And I came up with my 10. I moved them around. I'm moving guys up and down. And people are going to hate me when I get to like number 2 and number 1, because I feel like I'm going to lose a lot of credibility with people because people already have their feelings about who it should be. Starting at number 10, it has to be scary, sensational, whatever you want to call her, Sherri Martel. Now, Sherri Martel was one of the best female wrestlers of all time. I mean, she could talk, she could manage, she was never any issues back in the office. You know, she could get involved in matches. I remember Ric Flair and Sting. It was the WCW Championship and the WCW World International Championship. And I remember Sting actually doing a slingshot crossbody plancha from inside the ring, was trying to hit Ric Flair. Flair moved, and he lands on Sherri Martel. You can find this video. And the way that Sting, who's about 260 pounds at that point, lands on Sherri Martel, she goes back, and she cracks the back of her skull open on the steel guardrail, and she still gets up later and gets involved in the match.
One tough bird, man.
Yeah.
One tough bird. Holy shit.
You know, if people don't remember that, maybe you'll remember, you know, towards the, I don't know, the later part of her career when she was still in WCW and she was, you know, Sister Sherri managing Booker T and Stevie Ray Harlem Heat, and the success that they had against teams like the Nasty Boys and the Steiners. So yeah, Sherri Martel. And obviously, you know, the stuff that she did with Randy Savage, I can't leave that out, the Macho King. You know, and in the territory, Sherri Martel comes in at number 10. Number 9, this is someone who was not even on the list for Mike Tenay or Taz. I have to tell you, when I was growing up, he was probably, for my era, the most entertaining manager. Here was a guy who, and I'm going to tease it a little bit. If you guys out there know who I'm talking about, you start, you know, yelling the name out. He was in WCW. He didn't really get the respect that he deserved. He was one of the best talkers. He was put with some wrestlers who weren't really popular, but he managed to make, you know, lemonade out of lemons everywhere he went. He was fired from WCW. He went over to ECW. He reinvented himself. And he was stuck with a makeshift tag team of Mikey Whipwreck and Yoshihiro Tajiri. And they had some of the most entertaining segments. And then later he went on to manage the Monster Abyss to the NWA World Championship in TNA and Slash and the Disciples of the New Church. I'm talking about the Sinister Minister James Mitchell, coming in at number 9.
That was good, man. That was good. Sinister Minister. You know, you had me going, who is it? Who is it? Who is it? But once you said Whipwreck, and as soon as you said that,
Oh,
I was like, oh, I knew it was.
yeah. I mean, maybe we'll come back and we'll talk about our favorite tag teams of all time. But I can tell you, Mikey Whipwreck and Yoshihiro Tajiri, not together that long, but those segments and the Sinister Minister cackling and the long fingernails and the pointy eyebrows and that red suit and just how much he looks like what, you think that Satan or the devil looks like, and the pyro, and I mean, the guy was just ridiculously amazing.
Oh, yeah, he was good.
So there's my number 10, my number 9. You didn't have 10 or 9,
No,
but you have 8, so
I
I'm
have
going to
8.
let you tell everyone what 8 is and why.
Now, a lot of people are going to get mad at this one here, and they're going to be like, oh, you should be higher up on the list, but I figure this is a perfect spot for him. For me, I figure it's going to be Captain Lou Albano. Now, why did I put Lou there? I threw Lou there just because, he was a great manager at the end of his era. Well, I just got to watch him at the end of his era, when he was the heel, right? When he was managing the British Bulldogs. Way, way, way back in the days. I'm talking like before the Cyndi Lauper boys or girls want to have fun video, right?
Right.
Like, that's where I'm throwing Captain Lou. I'm throwing him at number 8 for that. Now, a lot of people are going to hate it, but it is what it is, right?
Well, and also, he was also Super Mario.
Yes, he was.
So, yeah. I mean, Captain Lou Albano, one of the great managers, one of the go-to guys for Vince McMahon Sr., a legendary manager, and in fact, I still play video games, and when I see flashy colored Hawaiian shirts in the games, I always think Captain Lou. Number 8 for me, and I'll probably lose some credibility with this because I don't know if he's on other people's lists, but I'm going to tell you why he's number 8. Now, here's a guy, he was never manager in the WWF, though he did work for the WWF, and he worked there as a referee, and he worked in WCW as a referee. And at one point, they said that he was the hardest working non-office member, non-wrestler in the sport of professional wrestling. He was working more dates and flying around, going around. The reason that I put him on the list, and the reason that I put him at number 8, here was a guy who was able to talk for people who couldn't talk. I mean, he managed Taz for a while when Taz wasn't really a great talker. He managed Sabu, probably the best manager Sabu ever had. Sabu didn't really talk. The energy that this guy had, and people are like, who are you talking about? And I think they'll know who I'm talking about when I say he had that goddamn annoying whistle at ringside that he always blew during Taz and Sabu and RVD's matches. I'm talking about the manager of champion, a man who managed so many championships in ECW, Mr. Bill Alfonso.
Can't go wrong with Bill, man. Can't go wrong with Bill. He's on my list too, but he's a little higher up with me. And that's because a little biased on my part,
Yeah. Yeah, well, okay, so we'll get into that a little bit later, but let's go ahead with your number 7 pick.
Number 7, I went with man who a lot of people will know for managing one of the biggest men in the WWE, and I believe he also managed the Islanders way, way back in the day also, come out waving that Oriental flag that everybody hated. Yep. I'm going with Mr. Fuji.
Mr. Fuji. Yeah, he was a guy that, and I gotta be honest with you, I don't have him on my list. I think of him as, he was a guy who was a wrestler, and when I think about managing, he didn't do a lot. I don't know. I mean, but okay, so you got yeah.
He was just there, He was always there, and with me, the most memorable thing with him was what he did to one of my most favorite wrestlers of all time when he robbed Bret Hart of that heavyweight championship where they gave it to Hogan when he threw that...
WrestleMania 9, that was in my hometown.
Yep.
And I'm also very proud as a guy who, really watched WWF and took it for what it was, that in my hometown, a town that WCW regularly sold out for Halloween Havoc at the MGM Grand Gardens, that we still have the record in my hometown for the lowest drawing crowd ever at a WrestleMania.
Yeah, I know. It is what it is, though, right? But, it was that was one of the most hated moments for me in wrestling history.
I felt the same way. We should tell people that you're Canadian.
Oh yeah.
And so, Bret Hart's like a god of wrestling to you. I mean, the Harts are sacred in Canada.
Oh God, there's maple syrup, beer, and the Harts.
Right. And I got to tell you, I was grew up as big of a Bret Hart fan as you did, if you can imagine that. Even when he kind of became anti-USA, I was still with Bret Hart. I was so pissed off. The only time I think I was ever more pissed off, red hot pissed off, was Survivor Series 97, Bret and Shawn, when I don't even want to go into it because I got up. I'm going to tell that story one day because I got up and physically got violent. One of the few times that ever happened with me watching wrestling. Let me go on to number 7, though. To me, another thing, when you talk about managers sometimes stuck with talent who can't talk and having to be the mouthpiece. At the same time, sometimes talent is provided a manager and they don't really need it. They either can talk or they have the intensity, they're believable, they have that intimidation factor. And certainly when you talk about being believable, tough badasses with an intimidation factor, legit badasses, you got to talk about Road Warrior Hawk and Road Warrior Animal, the Legion of Doom, whatever you want to call them, depending on if you saw them in the AWA or NWA or WWF. But for a long time, they were with a guy named Paul Ellering, who I believe he also managed them as Mr. in their last WWF run. A much better manager, I felt, than another person who managed the LOD, Sunny, who I will tell you she's not on my list. But yeah, Paul Ellering, always back there with the Wall Street Journal, a guy who was really smart. And when he did his promos, he came off as being so smart, but at the same time, one of the few managers who you thought, okay, if I run into him and I don't like him and the guys he manages aren't there, that manager's probably capable of legitimately kicking my ass.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Holy shit. He also didn't he also do a little stint with Horseman too?
Yeah, he might. The thing is, he was kind of everywhere. He was an AWA guy, WWF, I believe WCW.
Yes, WCW. That's where he had versus Teddy Long, a match against
Teddy
Long.
Wow.
Jesus, holy crap, man! Where'd that come? That came right out of left field, man.
Yeah, we're bringing up some stuff here. People are gonna have some homework to do. So let's move on. Let's move on to your number 6 pick.
Okay, my number 6, I believe, was your number 8 there. What's that? That was Bill Alfonso. Yeah. Now, reading for that, for me, like I said, there's bias with that, is because he brought me my favorite tag team of all time. And, I wanted to bump him up higher on the list there, but just due to the simple fact that he managed my favorite tag team of all time, couldn't really bring him any higher than he was, right? And that was when he managed Sabu and RVD.
Yeah.
Let
me, okay, I don't have a ranking of my top favorite wrestling matches of all time, but one of my favorite matches and one of the matches that I've watched more times than most matches, it was, I believe, at ECW Heatwave 98. It was RVD and Sabu, and they went up against Shinsei Shinsaki, who a lot of people might remember as Hakushi from the WWF, and his tag team partner, Hayabusa, and the match was beautiful.
Yes, that was actually the very first match that I watched these guys before I really discovered ECW. Because ECW wasn't really known up here in Canada, because up in Canada we only got mainstream wrestling, right? Yeah. And then ECW slowly kind of come out of the woodworks. I believe it was on, God, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was on some Chicago-based network. Like we just got a new channel.
WGN maybe.
Yeah, WGN. That was it. That's what That's where it got brought to us on. And then after I watched it, I remember watching that match on the internet. And then I was like, who the hell are these guys? Where could I find more wrestling like this? And then next thing you know, we got WGN and ECW was introduced to us up here.
Yeah, I grew up. I grew up in Vegas part-time, and way back in the day, there was something called, I can't even remember what the name of the promotion was, but it would have been my first exposure to both RVD and Sabu. RVD was part of a tag team. I can't remember his tag team partner, but it was called Aerial Assault, and Sabu was also there. And this was the promotion, as a lot of people might have heard, where that infamous pile driver between Sabu and Mick Foley Cactus Jack happened out on the, I don't know if it was a craps table or something. That was literally 5 minutes away from the house I grew up at, the Silver Nugget Casino, and I cannot tell you how big of stars they were in Vegas, and Terry Funk and the Barbarian, and anyway, so you've got Bill Alfonso at number 6. I think a lot of people might not even have Alfonso on the list. I'm going to give you my number 6 pick. And this is going a ways back, but here's a guy, and it's almost insulting to say that he managed Hulk Hogan, because it was one of the least memorable things that he did. He managed so many great wrestlers after he retired from wrestling. A lot of people don't give him enough credit for as technically sound as he was as a wrestler, but I've watched matches, old matches from the 40s, black and white. You know, when I was a little kid, I used to watch those old things that would come on like ESPN 12, you know, at 4:30 a.m. And so my number 6 pick is classy Freddie Blassie.
That's good.
Yeah, he's got to be on the list somewhere.
That's really good. Jesus, man, we're talking about this, dude. You're bringing me right back to my childhood. Holy shit.
Yeah. So let's go ahead to your number 5 pick.
Number 5, as I said there in the last one there, you heard him when we talked about when we mentioned Paul Ellering. And that would be the man that he took on in the hair versus hair match at WCW. Teddy Long.
Yeah. So,
I gotta throw Teddy Long in there, man. Like, he was good on the mic. I love the way how he just sold it, man, and how he still brought it, even though in this new era for that other company, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, he did great for them. Like, I loved when he managed Harlem Heat. That hair versus hair match was classic with Ellering. Oh God!
And I Teddy Long, a guy who he's worked in the office of different organizations. He's been a manager. He's been a referee. He's been like an on-air, commissioner / director of authority or whatever. I remember Teddy Long also. I don't know if you remember this, but it would have been towards the tail end of me really being a WWF fan when he was managing Jazz and Rodney Mack.
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember Jazz was, if you were an ECW fan, Jazz for the time was something you'd never seen, and we're going off on a tangent here, but her feud with Simon Diamond and her teaming up with Kid Cash, like Jazz, the female fighting phenom, and she went over to WWE, had a different look, and, her mic skills were good, but it really wasn't what they were looking for over there, and they put her with Teddy Long, and Teddy Long really did a nice job, managed her to the WWF Women's Championship. Did his best with Rodney Mack, but yeah, I don't actually have Teddy Long on the list, but, that's a good pick. Let's move on to, well, actually, let me tell you what my number 5 is. This is a guy, and this is where I'm going to start to get heat with people, because people are going to say, how dare you put him at number 5 when he should clearly be closer to the top, but my top 5 could all be number 1. When I talk about the commentary that I do when I do like a Thursday Night Throwdown or any of the wrestling things, that's modeled after Mike Tenay. Mike Tenay, obviously not a manager ever, not who I'm talking about. But when you think about the way that I've presented some of the videos, the character that I have that's really me, probably because I watched this annoying son of a bitch prick growing up and he rubbed off on me, because as annoying as he was articulate, he was intense, he was believable, and he still is to this day. And when you talk about the Bingo Hall channel and you look at those promos that I put together, if you don't see this man, if you don't see me ripping off this man in those promos and so many of the creative things that I've done, the way I put Throwdown together, just so many things, I've really been more influenced by him maybe than almost anyone else on the list. I'm going to put him over for 20 minutes before I tell you the name. And now I'm going to tell you the name. He goes by two names. A lot of people would call him Paul Heyman. I have him on the list as Paul E. Dangerously.
Classic, bud. Classic.
Oh, I mean, this guy... Let me tell you how brilliant this guy is. If you remember, at one point, WCW was out of business. ECW was out of business. There were 2 points in the whole invasion situation in WWF that I felt that the people in the building were standing up, that I was standing up at home, that we were passionate, that we were involved, that we believed what we were seeing, and we were pissed off. I had a t-shirt on that was buttoned up, and one of those moments I got so pissed off because Heyman was saying it like it was that I ripped my shirt off, almost a la Hogan. I remember buttons going flying all over the place. I can still hear them bouncing off the walls. Those 2 moments being the night that the ECW wrestlers showed up and they turned on the WWF guys, and Paul Heyman got in the ring and he was cutting that promo saying WWF hired him, and they sat him next to that fat pig Jim Ross. And the intensity, I mean, so this horrible invasion situation that no one cared about, there were 2 really great moments. That was one of them. And the other one was towards the end at Survivor Series when Paul Heyman got in the ring with Vince McMahon and he was telling him, you know, when Shawn Michaels lost his smile here in the World Wrestling Federation, Stone Cold Steve Austin was drinking his first beer in ECW.
Yeah.
And he was talking about Vince McMahon, how your father went around, he shook the hands of all the promoters and told them that he would never compete. And then when you took over, you turned your back on their word and you competed and you put Sam Munchnick out of business. You closed down the Funk's territory. And the passion there. And Heyman saying, and it all comes to a fever pitch this Sunday night live on pay-per-view when WCW and ECW, the alliance, put the cancer that is the WWF out of business once and for all, and justice will be restored to the sport of professional wrestling. And those were the 2 great moments. God, I went on Heyman for a long time. Wow.
Oh, no. Heyman actually, you know, like you said, like, that's going to be a big argument for everybody right there. Like, he should be number 1, but you know, I agree with you. He's in a good spot where he is, and you know, just a little more to talk about how great Heyman is. Look at what he's doing with Lesnar, right? Like in current times. I mean, the guy's just he's just taking that. If it wasn't for Paul, there wouldn't be no Lesnar.
Yeah, and I have to be honest with you. I have not seen any of the modern WWF stuff. I'm a huge wrestling fan, but I haven't watched that promotion in years. So. But I believe that he is, you know, he's one of those guys who can go out there and you put a mic in his hand and he's magic. And God, do you remember, this is going to turn into a whole Paul Heyman podcast, but when I was an ECW fan, and again, we talk about the Bingo Hall and where that inspiration is, go back and watch that Bingo Hall promo I did on this channel, where I talk about, you know, us being the smaller people and competing against the bigger channels, but we have the passion. That's straight out of Paul Heyman, and I knew it at the time when I was doing it. And let's take quality content to the extreme. I mean, of course that's Heyman.
Yeah.
That's Heyman in that ECW arena, or the Elks Lodge, rallying the fans together for the, you know, the Living Dangerously pay-per-view, and the first pay-per-view, barely legal, and you know, forget about Bischoff and Nitro. Forget about the McMahons and Raw. This is, you know, but, okay. So anyway, God, do you think we kissed Heyman's ass enough?
No, man. He deserves more credit than he gets. He really does.
Yeah, Jesus. Well, okay, let's move on now. Let's move on to your number 4.
you pretty much said it all for me, man. Like, I had a lot of similar points. Like, I just want to repeat a lot of what you said there. My number 4 is your number 5, Paul Heyman, man.
Okay, so I mean,
That's who my number 4 is,
yeah.
So I can't really say much more than what was said right there,
Yeah, you really can't. In fact, I am going to embarrass myself now. This is going to be the geekiest thing you've ever heard me say. When I was in high school, I had one of those binders that had like the clear plastic on both sides, and you'd see people would have, I don't know what they had, baseball cards or whatever. Everybody had celebrities that they liked, and to me, I had a crush on one woman in WCW, Daphne, and I had her on one side of my folder, and on the other side of the folder was a picture of Paul Heyman with the ECW press pass. So,
oh God, that's awesome, man.
Yeah. Okay. So Heyman is okay. Heyman is your number 4. Okay. Yeah. For anybody out there with high blood pressure or who has ulcer problems or maybe you've had brain aneurysms before, turn this off now, because when I give you my number 4, everyone's going to be pissed off that this person came in at number 4. Because how dare I? And I tell you, he could be number 1. I'm sure he is number 1 on more top pro wrestling managers of all time than anybody else. But I'm gonna tell you why he's number 4, and then I can't really explain the way I want to, but as I get to the top 3, I'll explain. My number 4 is probably the number 1 pick for most people out there, Bobby the Brain Heenan. Now,
can't go wrong with the Weasel.
Yeah, you really can't. I think that when people hear that he's number 4, now be intrigued, people, because who the hell could be 3 guys I put in front of Heenan?
Wow, man.
Heenan, AWA, WWF, I mean, managed so many people, the great work he did with Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. I remember how perfect were they coming down the aisle, because Kurt would spit that gum out and slap it and didn't even look at it. It was just perfect.
Yeah.
When Kurt was at the announce table, he'd flip that pen up 3 times and catch it, something that David Letterman has tried for years to do and can't do. But the thing is, when Kurt would spit that gum out and slap it, he'd throw that towel back, and Heenan, without even looking back, would reach behind his back, grab that towel, and flip it onto his own shoulder. So it was awesome. Heenan also had an amazing ability. Heenan had the ability to run at like half a mile an hour and look like he was running at 50 miles an hour.
Yeah.
When it was time to bail out of that ring, I've never seen a guy vault the top rope like Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Oh, Weasel was great at what he did, man. Oh, man.
I mean, how great was he? He was great as a commentator in WWF, but when he went to WCW, he felt like he can just say whatever the hell he wants. And yeah. I think one of the great moments in WCW for Heenan was the NWO's coming out, they're taking over, and Heenan's on Team WCW, and he's bashing the hell out of them. And look at those guys in the ring, Holland, Nash, and Hogan. Let's get someone out there to, kick their asses and whatever. He didn't even like Hogan. He never liked Hogan, so now he could really go after Hogan and say, see, I told you so.
Yeah.
And this went on for months and months and months, and I remember one night the NWO took over, and they came over to the announce booth, and Heenan, without any hesitation, said, "You know what, guys? It's been nice, but I'm going with the NWO. I see who's in charge here." Now the NWO ends up getting their ass kicked, and the next week WCW's back in control, and Heenan shows back up at the announce table and pretty much just says, "Listen, while you guys sat here and did nothing, I was the only guy with the guts to go back there with the NWO and try to challenge them. I was standing up for WCW." I mean,
oh God, Heenan was one of those guys that, like you said, like those managers where you're like, okay, if I see you without your talent, I'm gonna bitch slap you, right?
Yeah.
Heenan was just one of those guys that was able to pull that off.
Heenan's got a great autobiography out too that I've read, and it's one of the best wrestling books. I mean, it's absolutely great. He did have a short appearance in TNA also, which, was cool because he sat at the announce table and he put his stamp of approval on it, and he said, "You know what? This thing's going to work."
That's awesome.
You know, and also when Bobby Roode left Team Canada, there was a slight Heenan thing. Heenan was one of the managers who wanted to kind of come in and maybe work with Roode, but yeah, the Brain, number 4. I mean, I could go on. He managed so many great champions. I could go on and on and on. Hopefully, I've praised him enough that people won't kill me for having him at number 4. But so now, yeah.
You and me, we're gonna have to butt heads on that, eh?
yeah. I had a feeling. You know, anytime you do this list, I had a feeling. But let's go to your number 3. Now, these are our top 3 picks, managers in pro wrestling of all time. Who's your number 3?
Number 3 along with number 4 there. Like, my top 4 could be interchangeable any way you look at it. It depends however you see it, but for myself, this is the way I decided to do it. And number 3, I went with the man with the tennis racket. You know, I couldn't think of anybody else that I could put at number 3. He's another one of those guys that was just able to speak on the mic. He was also another manager that like you said earlier, where after he's done speaking, you're like, I'm gonna cross paths with you, and when we do, you're gonna get a slap, you know?
Yeah.
That was Jim Cornette. That's who I got number 3 for myself, man. He just, just the way he would scream and his passion. I don't know, like, I still remember watching early WCW Pro, before their WCW, when they're NWA, I think it was. Yeah. When they're NWA, I still remember watching early promos from that. And just hearing him go off, and I was thinking to myself, God, this guy is such a ass, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've even before that, he was a guy who traveled around the territories with, obviously, the Midnight Express is who you've got to think about when you think about Cornette managing, but he took them briefly into Fritz von Erich's World Class Championship Wrestling in Dallas. So many great stories. One of the stories that I've heard, and I've heard this from Cornette, and I've heard this with other guys as well, too. I've heard this from like Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson and some of those guys. You know, they were NWA guys. Jim Cornette was, along with the Midnight Express. And I guess at one point they were contacted by WWF and they were like, okay, well, we'll listen to them. And Vince McMahon, as Jim Cornette's talking about, man, these guys, my tag team, they've got revolutionary moves and combinations, things that are still stolen today. I mean, you know, a lot of the moves and combinations that they came up with. And by the way, Jim Cornette was the one who came up with a lot of those tag team combination moves.
That's crazy.
But Cornette talking to the McMahons and telling them, yeah, we can wrestle. We've drawn this much here and here. And Vince McMahon saying, well, that's nice, but we kind of just want to bring him up so we can make some dolls of him and sell the dolls.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Holy shit, eh?
So, okay, so let me give you my number 3 pick, and we talked a little bit about World Class Championship Wrestling with this guy, in my opinion, unless I'm forgetting somebody, the greatest manager in the history of World Class Championship Wrestling. Arguably, a lot of people would say, arguably the greatest manager in the history of the World Wrestling Federation as well, managing multiple champions or you know, multiple people to different championships. One of Jim Cornette's best friends, as a matter of fact, I'm talking about Percy Pringle III, and a lot of people might not recognize him under that name that he had before WWF. A lot of people might know him by his WWF name, Paul Bearer.
Damn.
He's got to come in on that list because, to me, and I know everyone loves The Undertaker, especially they love The Undertaker more than I do. I was a fan, but, you know, like I said, I was such a big Bret Hart fan that when they met at it was at a SummerSlam, and it was like, if The Undertaker won, he would win Bret Hart's championship. If Bret Hart won, then Bret Hart had to leave. And I just remember The Undertaker didn't do anything wrong, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I hated him for it, and I never got over it. Shawn Michaels was the referee, and I hate Shawn Michaels with a passion, as I'm sure you do for the same reasons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You're not inviting Shawn up for a Canadian dinner anytime soon?
No, man, no. But
No.
he'll see him. He'll be like, "What do the 5 fingers say to the face?"
Yeah, pretty much. But yes, Percy Pringle, and also one of the best talkers ever in wrestling, one of the best storytellers. Now, you might not know this from seeing his Paul Bearer stuff, even though he was good as Paul Bearer. And again, The Undertaker could talk, but couldn't talk, if you know what I mean. So to have Paul Bearer there, and Paul Bearer, who was actually, a guy who had a degree in mortuary science in real life and actually did run funeral homes. That was legit, so it was perfect. And the way that he reinvented himself, if you guys pull up pictures of Percy Pringle or Percival Pringle III, Paul Bearer had a bleach blonde mustache. He had bleach blonde hair. He actually, I know this for a fact, he bleached his hair blonde because he was a fan of Bobby the Brain Heenan.
That's crazy.
So yeah, for all those reasons, Paul Bearer's on the list. Okay, so let's hear this is your number 2 manager of all time in pro wrestling. Who is it?
Yeah, I have to go with Jimmy Hart, man. Jimmy Hart. I liked him just because, like I said, that's the era I grew up with, right?
Right.
Like with the Hart Foundation, the whole Hogan thing, right? Watching Jimmy Hart go from being the heel to the good guy, managing, what was it, he managed when it was Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, man. Now, as a kid, that's like the ultimate wrestling dream right there, right?
Yeah.
But then, with him, what he did with the Hart Foundation, how he kept going with Jim the Anvil, right? And keeping Jim the Anvil around after, right? After Brett, when he did the split. So, that's who I got to put up there. And yeah, right here's where I had a really tough time too, because like I had Paul Bearer on there, but I think I wound up deleting him out when I shuffled everything around.
Yeah.
Shit. So
Paul Bearer is one of my favorite, and the funny thing is, I never gave a damn about the Paul Bearer persona or the Undertaker or anything, but I loved watching the old Percy Pringle stuff. Not to get back to this, but when the Jarretts took over World Class Championship Wrestling and I can't even remember what the name of their territory, the UWSA, Jarrett, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Jeff Jarrett, I can't even remember the USWA. When they took over World Class, it was actually Paul Bearer who lost the match, or the guy he was managing lost the match that meant that World Class was closing, and Percy Pringle, Paul Bearer loved that territory so much, he had to take down the World Class Championship banner, and the story that he's told is he's glad the camera was behind him, because as he took down the banner, he was legitimately crying, and there were tears coming down his cheeks. But that's not Jimmy Hart. Why are we talking about him again? But yeah, Jimmy Hart, when Hulk Hogan jumped ship and went to WCW, he was, in Hogan's corner for a number of years there. He showed up in TNA, and I believe if memory serves me correctly, he managed Chase Stevens and Andy Douglas, the Naturals, before they were managed by the franchise Shane Douglas. Jimmy Hart, also a guy who's made a number of the classic pro wrestling themes, everything from the Honky Tonk Man's theme to that classic NWO theme.
No way.
Yeah, Jimmy Hart.
That's something I didn't know about that, man.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
A musical genius, and so that's an amazing pick. Let me give you my number 2 pick. Now, again, I've got to qualify everyone I say, because they're ahead of number 4, Bobby Heenan. How can who the hell's number 2? The only reason I give this guy number 2, and I'm gonna tease you a little bit, he was a great talker, despite the fact that he really didn't have to be, because everyone he managed were great talkers. In fact, he managed arguably the greatest talker in professional wrestling at the time, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Now, when you're managing Ric Flair, a man who can talk, styling and profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing son of a gun, that means something. When you're as dapper as he is with the suits, and when it's believable that you'd be friends with him and that you'd travel with him and hang out with him, and at the same time, not only are you managing Ric Flair to multiple, NWA, WCW championships, you're managing Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, all of you're managing everybody. And no, I'm not talking about Baby Doll. I'm talking about James J. Dillon.
JJ. That's all I remember him by. I was trying to say it before that, in my head, but I like to go with JJ. I was trying to remember his last name. Holy shit, dude.
Okay, so he's so high up on the list because if you're a manager and you manage not only champions, but you manage all of the highest, most prestigious championship belts in professional wrestling, many of them at the same time, for years on end. He was literally the manager who started, what became these really over pro wrestling factions. I mean, if you rank pro wrestling factions, the Four Horsemen would probably rank in at number 1.
Yeah.
So I got to give it to J.J. Dillon. He was also a guy who worked in the office, on air, off air, a tremendous guy, and a guy also, on a side note, who, if you see him today, he looks the same way you remember. A lot of guys age. He stopped aging at about 40. He looks the exact same. And now, see, the curiosity now when we go to number 1, because we all know who number 1's going to be for you. I'm not going to say it yet. But the curiosity is, who is my pick going to be? But let's hear your pick.
Well, you already said that's the one where you're going to get lynched, man. Yeah. I got to go with the Brain for myself, man. The Brain, just like the Weasel. That's what I remember him as, the Weasel. Watching WWF back then on Saturday mornings. So that's when it was on here, right? Like the Friday night show was Saturday here, and then we had what was it? Saturday Night Main Event up here. Right. And then when they had, just hearing the Weasel chants when he'd come out, Weasel, and how he'd react to the crowd, how he'd feed the crowd. Not to mention all the legends that he managed, Andre the Giant, Ravage. He managed Ravishing Rick Rude, one of my favorite wrestlers, man, before Rick Rude became manager himself. That's something we should put on the list. Shit. See what I mean, man?
Yeah.
It's just, you can't go wrong with Bobby the Brain as number 1. And just the way that he was able to sell it on the mic, to me, he was one of the best mic men out there. And as a commentator, too, I can't really say much more than what you said about him. A lot of the notes that I had kind of down with him about what he said about NWO, I actually had that written down here, man.
Yeah.
I shit you not, that was one of the specific things I had written down about Bobby the Brain number 1 here. So.
and to add a little something to that, one of the most compelling things that happened in pro wrestling in the early 90s, something that, a lot of the stuff that happened back then, it wouldn't be compelling if it happened today, but this was something that has happened on a couple of occasions, but I'd never seen it before. When Ric Flair was the world champion of WCW and came over to the WWF with the belt, and the work that Heenan did introducing him as the real world heavyweight champion, and that whole situation where Flair had, the belt from down south, and kind of, it was a rare occasion when WWF, who still doesn't do it, admitted that, hey, yes, there is at least one other wrestling organization, and we don't have the only world championship.
Yeah. Oh, God. No, Brain was able to sell anything, man. You could put him with anybody and he would turn him into a star, I think.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys, right?
So now it comes down to my number 1 pro wrestling manager of all time. This is a guy, I must have some nerve, because I'm telling you that I put him higher than Heenan. I put him higher than number 3, Paul Bear Percy Pringle. Number 2, James J. Dillon. And you actually did have him on your list. You had him at number 3. I have him at number 1. JC, Jim Cornette. James E. Cornette, I cannot tell you when we talk about how much Paul Heyman influenced me, Jim Cornette influenced me. I remember in college taking, multiple classes. One of them was a speech class, and we had this format of, this is the correct way to go up and give a speech, and there's bullet points and everything. And I went up there, and I was the worst person in the class. And I remember thinking, I went home that night and thought, I know how to talk. What's the problem? And I remember thinking the problem is they're giving me this shitty format. I'm sure if they did the same thing to Jim Cornette, he wouldn't be good. And I went back, and the next speech we had to give was a speech on someone we really admire, someone we really respect and look up to, just a courageous, upstanding, great individual. And in the style of Jim Cornette, I went in and I gave the best speech in the class when I said, the best individual, my role model, the person I look up to, the greatest person in the world, in my opinion, is me. And I cut a 15-minute Jim Cornette style promo and never had an issue in speech class or talking ever again. He's one of the reasons I can do a throwdown and sit there for an hour and talk and not have to feed off of anyone, not run out of things to say. He's one of the reasons why I can talk for an hour and a half. And at the end of the hour and a half, instead of saying, man, I ran out of things to say, I'm more upset that I had 6 hours of things to say and didn't get them all in. But God, awesome. Jim Cornette, a man who, you talk about managing the Midnight Express. I mean, arguably the greatest tag team of all time. A lot of people say Legion of Doom. A lot of people at this point would say, Team 3D, but so many of the things that they invented, the style. I mean, how many times are you watching a tag team match now and you see that hot tag? That was something that they really did. And by the way, I know people are going to throw a flag on it and they're going to say that was Morton and Gibson. But if you remember, the Midnight Express, they were the other end of it. They would take that enziguri kick and then Morton and Gibson would get off and there'd be the hot tag. And a lot of this stuff came from Jim Cornette, 15 near falls at the end, sunset flip in a 2 count, a small package in a 2 count. So much of this stuff, Jim Cornette, a great announcer. Jim Cornette, probably one of the few people in the world who is so good at what he does that he could turn Paul E. Dangerously into someone that the fans hated more, and at the same time turn himself into someone who the fans like when the fans had disliked him for the last, 15 or 20 years. Another thing that I think he brought to the table, there's so many people who've gotten heat, and maybe you can't get the same heat now in wrestling, but so many people who've gotten heat over the years for, being a little bit gay and this really macho thing that's supposed to be straight. Jim Cornette early on was the guy coming out in those really high water shorts with the bright clothes on, and he was the rich mama's boy, and he kind of, maybe ambiguously gay a little bit, and he played off of these things. And
I think he was actually one of the very first men to come out in a pink blazer.
Oh yeah, always the bright colors, the powder blue, the bright red. And when you talk about, I don't know if we've touched on this, when you talk about a promo, oh my God. I mean, one of the best promos ever in professional wrestling. The guy can just go. He, like Maury Amsterdam on the Dick Van Dyke Show, the human joke machine, where you give him a word and he makes a joke out of it. That's Cornette. Who's fighting? When are they fighting? What are they fighting for? And Cornette will go on for 15 minutes.
Right back on cue, like it didn't even miss a beat too, right? Just carrying on with commentary.
Yeah, and here's a guy early on, the rich mama's boy, who, he really doesn't need the money. He wants to, manage pro wrestlers. Sherry Martel, by the way, was the very first person he ever managed. There's a bit of trivia, and she was my number 10 manager. But yeah, how brilliant is it that here's this rich guy, and you feel he's hanging out at country clubs, and the tennis racket just ties in so well. And it was a weapon that no one had ever used in a world where people were using steel chairs and all these things. A tennis racket. Not only not only is it going to make that great sound when it connects, but you've got the heat also because it's like you're down south. There's people, chewing tobacco with these southern drawls and they're cowboys. And look at this rich prick sellout. Yeah, you sound southern too, and you all of a sudden you want to be like a elitist liberal from the Northeast.
I can't tell you how many matches I remember seeing that Racket win the match.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like Cornette's down and out, right? He gets hit off the rope, and then the other opponents, whatever, get whipped into the rope, and somehow he gets up and smacks him in the back, and then they get pinned.
That's always I don't know if anyone else has jokes with themselves that no one else understands, but that's always been a joke of mine when someone I know, they've got a football game that they're playing, or there's they're going in for a job interview or something that they want, something that they're trying to achieve, and I always tell them, and they never get it. And I always tell them, okay, best of luck, but watch the Racket.
Zing.
Cornette running so many different organizations, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, a successful territory that he ran at the end when nobody was running successful territories and everyone was out of business. God, I believe he's still one of the owners of Ohio Valley Wrestling and still holding on to that.
Yeah.
I can't say enough about Jim Cornette, so please forgive me for not having Heenan at number 1, but hopefully I've convinced you to at least not hang me for having Jim Cornette at number 1. And
Cornette, in my opinion, is definitely worthy of one. Like I said, anyone in these top 5, man, any one of them would be number 1. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're all just that good, right?
I completely agree. So we have been going at this a while now. We are going to wrap this up. That has been my very first ever pro wrestling podcast. I've been joined by RedEyeJedi. He is
pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you've got a YouTube channel too. The link is in the description, and we will do more of these. We want to know what you guys think in the comment section. Let us know. Who are your picks? Did we get it wrong? Do you not agree with us? Did we bring up some memories that you hadn't thought about? Did you learn something about me? And follow me on Twitter at ArachnidSoul, and we will catch you girls and guys, you wrestling fans, later.